The Baltimore Ravens signed wide receiver and returner Deonte Harty on Wednesday. We talk about what it means for the Ravens wide receivers and a lot more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, as always, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here with you, as always, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Thank you so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form. You can like this video, subscribe to the channel. Also, audio form. You can follow along wherever you get your favorite podcast. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the whole 9 yards there. We bring you 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150. Win or lose, visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We are here on a Thursday edition episode. Back with us is our Thursday guest, this former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver and Super Bowl champion, Qadry Ismail. Here we're just about 2 weeks away from the draft now. It is crazy to think how this has kind of snuck up on us. The Ravens, though, they make a move. Eric DeCosta talked at the proclaimed Liars Luncheon, said that Kyle Van Noy was one of the last things on his checklist, and he was re-signed. But the Ravens, they go, and he was apparently not the last thing, as Baltimore signed Deonte Harty, wide receiver and returner, to a one-year deal. So Baltimore still being active, even though we're just a couple weeks away from the draft.
I'll tell you what, one of the things that you know about the Ravens, it's not even about the roster for the draft. It's not about the offseason roster, but it's, yeah, you made the team. Yeah, this is the roster for opening day. We're still tweaking it, and that's okay. That's been the mantra, so I am glad to see that it's still going. I am very, very happy for the signing of Kyle Van Noy. I'm very happy and excited that they were able to recognize his talents, his leadership, and all the things that he brings as a veteran presence to the locker room. And I think, Deonte Harty, the fact that he is a quality returner and has some, experience in the league under pressure situations and really has delivered, shows that they are in the process of no stone unturned. We're going to go ahead and we're going to make this thing. There's 90 guys that are going to make this team to start with. He's going to be one of them. And I appreciate the identification of the different players that are going to make up this Ravens roster.
Yeah, so for Harty, just some general stats to kick things off here. Was a Pro Bowler and an All-Pro his rookie season in 2019 with the Saints, and that obviously was as a returner. Now, over the course of his career, it's 5 years, only 79 receptions for 943 yards, does have 5 touchdowns. His best year came a couple years ago in 2021. He had 36 catches, 570 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's also been used as a rusher, not necessarily a ton, only 19 career carries, but you go down to the return aspect of things. Career-wise, he's averaged 10.4 yards per punt return and 25.2 yards per kick return. And we know, Q, with the way that the NFL has shifted the kickoff rules and how everything is going to be a lot different when it comes to that, teams, and we've seen it, it's not just the Ravens thing. We know the Ravens have valued special teams for a really long time now, but other teams are now starting to make these special teams only signings, essentially. And while Harty can still contribute on offense, you look at this signing and you think, well, Devin Duvernay has now gone to Jacksonville. There wasn't really a pure returner on the roster. You could argue Tylan Wallace after he had his big magical moment with that punt return against the Rams, but Harty is someone that can come in and instantly be the replacement for Devin Duvernay.
Yeah, it's interesting how the league works. You look at a Tylan Wallace and you say, man, that punt return was just so electric, and it is one of the most exciting plays in Ravens history. Goodness, it's right up there with Jacoby Jones, right on that same sideline, right on the Ravens sideline when he had his phenomenal return. I think it was like in the last couple of seconds, there was like a lot of scoring back and forth. I forget the opponent that they played that day, but Jacoby Jones winds up, with his punt return that seals the deal, and they wind up going on and winning and go in Raven lore. Well, here comes Tylan Wallace. He goes on in Raven lore. But then you go ahead and get Deonte Harty because you recognize that, yes, we need a consistent guy. And I think for Tylan Wallace, there are other things that they peg him to do, and that's part of the game. When my number is called, I'm ready. But at the same time, I also recognize that, they're going to try to find other guys to fill that role, and I got to be ready regardless of what they feel fills out the roster. We don't know what Deonte Harty is going to be, but I know that I'm going to be ready regardless, and that would be my thinking if I'm Tylan Wallace.
And here's the thing about Tylan Wallace too, Q, is, a lot of people are saying, well, just, give him a chance, let him be the full-time returner. Tylan Wallace has 3 career kick returns and literally 6 career punt returns. So 9 total returns for Tylan Wallace. This is not an experienced returner we're talking about. I'm not saying don't give him a chance. I mean, obviously there's going to be competition. I think Tylan can also, the way that these kickoffs are going to work, teams are probably going to be using 2 returners a lot more now. So you have a guy in Harty, and then, go put Tylan Wallace out there too. Like, you now have, this is not a move that necessarily, and we'll talk about this a bit more in the second segment, but it's not necessarily about, oh, well, Harty's here to take like 5 different people's jobs. Harty's here to complement the other guys on the roster. And when you talk about it from an offensive perspective, Q, again, I'm not expecting too much. I mean, you can use him in a bunch of different ways. He's shifty, he's speedy. But to me, you're going to try to find roles for everybody in the wide receiver room right now, including Deonte Harty. But, is he going to go out there and catch 50 balls this year? Probably not.
I think you look at his statistics and you look at what he's done before, you have a picture of what he's going to be. I know that, yes, when you look at the Ravens' history of returners, they have had good opportunities to be a great receiver or a Hall of Famer in Ed Reed. But when you look at, I think for Deonte Harty, and you look at his statistics, I think it says that, he's a returner. He's going. Tylan, go ahead and jump in there and be whatever for bait on this play, or you're gonna Zay Flowers just ran 3 9 routes. Okay, you're gonna go ahead and sub in for him for a whole series, and we feel really comfortable with you going in there. Whoop, time to be on 4th down and get a return of Deonte. Go ahead there. I mean, that's what it is. He knows his role. He's comfortable with it, and I think they're comfortable with it.
Yeah, and to me as well, this is a move that a lot of people are saying, and this is an interesting part of it too, where to me, Q, the sweet spot for wide receivers, and I know we've talked about this in terms of how many to keep on a roster, is 6. Now, we'll get to this a little bit more in the second part of the show, but we've talked about kind of the receiver that Baltimore needs and what type of receiver. Well, Deonte Harty's listed at 5'6". He's 170 pounds. He's not the big-bodied receiver that a lot of people have been wanting in Baltimore, but as you said, that's not the reason they're bringing him in. There are a lot of different ways that the Ravens can utilize him and have him be a part of their offense, but this, to me, the Ravens love their specialty. I mean, we literally saw them bring back Chris Board a couple weeks ago. Board can play some linebacker for him, but that is primarily a special teams move. And now we're seeing all the other teams trying to get in on that. And reportedly, there were multiple teams interested in Deonte Harty, but Baltimore was able to seal the deal, to close it. And he's a local kid. He went to Archbishop Curley. I actually played with my friend over there at Archbishop Curley. So it's another homecoming story. We've seen it a lot with these guys, but this is a wait and see move for me, where I think it's great in terms of the special teams aspect, but are they only going to draft a guy, and is that going to be it for the wide receiver room? Are they going to put that trust in Rashod Bateman? There are still questions that have to be answered, but what's clear to me, Q, is this is going to be the guy for them at returner, and I think he's one of the better ones in the league, and a lot of teams being interested kind of showcases that to me.
And that's exactly right. You see a skill set, you see what he's done, you see the reliability of it all. I mean, I clearly remember there were times where, the game is tight on the line and they would bring in Ed Reed to do the return. And you're like, yeah, well, he's just going to catch it. He might even take it back to the house. Who knows? But we know it's going to be secure. That's what you want. That's what you want. You want a guy that you know that this is your craft. You have honed it in. Obviously, his size-wise, I mean, you could say, well, yeah, but Zay is little. Yeah, but Zay is Zay. And Zay's going to do Zay-type things. And, Deonte had probably in the very beginning of his career an opportunity to do Zay-like things and just couldn't get it done. But that's okay. He can get it done as a returner. He can be reliable. Fine. Game on. Let's go.
Yeah. The Ravens, it's a fine move. I mean, it's not one that's going to necessarily blow anybody out of the water in terms of a wide receiver. But, look, you need positions to be filled. And Devin Duvernay was somebody that they lost, and he was their primary returner. You now bring in somebody you can argue is an upgrade from Devin Duvernay, because we did see Duvernay take kind of a step back last season. And so I'm excited to see what Harty can bring to the table. But coming up in the second part of the show, we're going to talk a little bit more about the wide receiver aspect of things here. If this signing means anything for players like Rashod Bateman, Tylan Wallace. Stay tuned. We got a lot to get to on the show. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slapstosh to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. Hopefully for the Denver Nuggets, there are a lot of playoff wins coming their way. They play the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm recording this before they play the game. Hopefully they win. They're probably going to lose, but hopefully they do win. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. What are you waiting for? FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. We are back, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher and Qadry Ismail still talking with you here. Q, the Ravens, again, they signed Deonte Harty to that one-year deal, but only like $1.2 million, 1.1. So not necessarily in terms of the salary cap. The Ravens, I think, will still enter the draft if nothing else happens with about $9 million in cap space. But now the receiver room, and I'm just going to read this out, and I want you to react to it. The wide receiver room for Baltimore right now is Zay Flowers, Rashod Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, Tylan Wallace, and Deonte Harty. I don't think they're done adding. I still think one more guy is going to come into that room, whether it be in the draft or a veteran. But just hearing those five guys, how do you feel about the state of the wide receiver room right now?
I don't care. When I look at the receiver room of 2000 and even 99 for the most part, there was a lot of hate, a lot of doubt. Clearly, social media was nowhere near. Matter of fact, it probably wasn't even existing then. Maybe there was some level of, Mark Zuckerberg trying to do some things with Facebook. Who knows? But all I know is this, that when it came down to it, it's about guys believing in themselves in the room and that quarterback believing in themselves. When you look at the state of the Ravens' big name star players, yep, Mark Andrews is the main guy. I think the likely facet of it and the way in which Zay really kind of just captured the explosiveness of the offense, I don't have any doubt whatsoever that this is a group that if status quo, no, veteran or, they don't draft a guy, they bring in some other guys, I think they're going to be just fine. It's interesting to me because one of the things Eric DeCosta kept saying was like, you know what? Yeah, we've been in this position. We're going to add some players. But at the same time, yeah, we're going to have young guys step up. And I think we're going to have guys just in those positions to step up. Yeah, like what? Yeah, we would like Brandon Ayuk, but there's a salary cap, and so there's some things you got to do business wise that prevent you from getting guys that have quote unquote a lot of years left and have produced early in their career. Okay, that's great, but at the same time, the guys that are on the roster, they're getting an opportunity. I don't understand where this, and I'm not saying you in particular, but you and I, like as we talk about it with Bateman, I can see some of the things that he needs to do. But boy, I look on X and it's like, gee, y'all think Bateman is a bum, and he's not. Dude, he's going to get his opportunities, but when he's he's been out there. He's been open. Like, he's been, like, solid. Like, I'm like, dang. Like, go ahead and sleep on him. I think that's more fuel, more logs to add to the fire when it comes to the receiver room. And I love it. I love every bit of it.
Yeah, I personally am still a Bateman believer. Obviously, there are still some things he has to show and, the connection with Lamar, but he also has put a lot out on tape already in terms of him getting open one-on-one and running those routes. So this is a make or break year for Bateman, but it's safe to say, Q, based off of your response, and we've talked about this before, where the Josh Reynolds type, the Michael Gallup type, even the Deonte Harty type, those aren't players to come in and necessarily challenge Rashod Bateman for that number 2 job. Those are players to complement within a specific role, whether it be in the offense, in Harty's case, some special teams as well. That's not a guy that's going to come in and necessarily, I think we talked about it a bit with Odell too, where when Odell came in, it was almost like, well, who is the 2? Is it Bateman? Is it Beckham? Like, we never really knew because I think they flip-flopped for a lot of the year. This is like, all right, there's nobody. If this is the way it stays, maybe they bring in a guy in the draft. Bateman's not looking behind his shoulder to say, oh, this guy's on my heels. Is that going to cause some stress or whatnot? Safe to say with your answer, you're completely okay with them trusting Bateman in that number 2 job.
And here's the thing, because the point you made about Odell, I think it pushed Bate and gave him, the mental competitiveness to be like, yo, I got to step up my game. I'm going to step up my game. I did step up my game. I would, if I'm him, I would look at any game that I played in last year and hold my head up high. Outside of the Pittsburgh game, where you talk about character building, that's a big character building game. That's a game where, like, man, on a grand stage, on like you and I, Pittsburgh week, it's a different type of a podcast for both of us when we talking about an intense rivalry. We talk about the Cincinnati rivalry in a type of way, Cleveland rivalry in a type of way. But when it's Pittsburgh, it's different. He flunked the test. Okay, great. There's nowhere to go but up for him. We saw, and we even spoke about how he took over a game against Cleveland at Cleveland when they were playing man-to-man on the outside, and Snoop needed to make a play. And Bates stood up and made plays. Same guy. And he's only getting better. I think health, as long as he stays healthy, my goodness, sky's the limit.
And that's the thing for him, where whether it's him getting injured in the offseason, right around training camp, him getting injured early in the year like he did last year, it's felt like he's missed time, and that is disrupted rhythm. If he's able to stay healthy for the entire offseason program, the entire year, that to me, I think we're going to hopefully at least see a different Rashod Bateman. And look, there's going to be a conversation about the 5th-year option. Obviously, Eric DeCosta didn't really go into much detail during the pre-draft press conference about that. There is still about a month till that decision. But regardless of what the decision is, that's not going to prevent Bateman from either having or not having a good year. We can see that maybe the same trajectory Patrick Queen did, where his option was decline, goes and balls out. And that also, just to get ahead of it now, Q, the 5th-year option being declined does not mean that Bateman's Ravens career is over and that's the last year guaranteed. Baltimore could love what they see out of him, and they could say, yeah, we're going to re-sign you to a longer-term deal. But for Bateman, this is a huge year for him. I also think, Q, it's a big year for Tylan Wallace, especially if, the Ravens went this route with Deonte Harty and they only add one more player, where, again, if the matchup number is 6, they're at 5 right now. So I think Wallace is going to have somewhat of a big role where Aguilar kind of slots in to a full-time number 3 role for them at this point, unless they draft a first-round receiver. But then Tylan Wallace, I think, is going to get some snaps. Obviously, he's been injured. He's had his fair share of injuries as well. But they drafted him in the 4th round with the hope that he could turn into this maybe great mid-round receiver. I think we're going to see if he can do it, and this is the year potentially.
I think so. I really do. I think that there's the Todd Monken experience has grown because now you're in year 2. Year 2 is one where there is a lot of little details that you didn't know last year, you do now. And I think there's a comfort level, with understanding how to be a pro, Thailand, Bate, all those guys are not sitting there like their mind racing 1,000 miles an hour. And meanwhile, from a bigger picture aspect of things, they can't slow it down. They can slow it down. The game has slowed down for them. And I think that's the advantage that they have. And I think Thailand, if you want to, this is the do or die time. And I think he'll be ready. He'll be ready. And I think the fact that you don't have to be ready in a offense that you're unfamiliar with, I think that's going to be to his advantage.
Yeah, and there is always a risk level in terms of rolling with guys who haven't necessarily, quote unquote, proven at the NFL level. But Baltimore is familiar enough now with Bateman, with Wallace, with these guys to say, hey, we know what these guys can bring to the table. Now it's about going out there on game day and producing and maybe showing what they show in practice. They might be the best practice wide receivers you've ever seen in your life. But of course, it all gets determined, I guess, based off of what you do in the games. Coming up, though, we are going to talk a bit more about the notion of the Ravens essentially going young at wide receiver, especially with the draft approaching. Also continuing to talk about what Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh did have to say at the pre-draft press conference. Stay tuned. Lots to get to here on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up peak performance, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts, your number one ride or die will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker and Qadry Ismail still chopping it up with you here. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe both in video form and audio form for 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Q, there's this, all teams have to go through it in terms of trying to find the perfect balance between getting young guys some snaps, bringing veterans in that can come and help your team immediately. There's always a certain level that some teams maybe 1 year value the young experience. Other teams another year might value the veteran leadership. In Baltimore, it feels like the way they're building out this roster right now, it's not that they're not going to add another veteran. They literally just added one yesterday. But they want to give their young guys a chance. And this goes beyond wide receiver even. Like, I think they want to give their young offensive linemen a chance to compete. They want to give their young secondary guys, young edge rushers. It feels like Baltimore's at a point where, yeah, you know what? You do need veterans at this point. We're going to see them continue to add. But if you keep putting guys in front of these young players, you're never going to know what they can do. And that's the balance teams have to figure out.
Well, I think it also helps when you look at guys in your own division and you see how they develop their own players, whether it be receivers in Pittsburgh. Obviously, defensively, you've seen that plenty of times from a secondary aspect in Cincinnati and how well they have developed their young players into players. But you also look at teams that have franchise quarterbacks and Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, and obviously Patrick Mahomes, he did it where he had the Tyreek Hills. He did it where he didn't have star players, obviously last year, and yet he still won. I think the Tom Brady's of the world, he didn't have those, upper tier star players, but he had role players that knew their job and they did it extremely well. And ultimately, it comes down to, do you want to load and build your team? That's a way to do it. It comes at a cost, a la the LA Rams. They won their Super Bowl, but it came at a cost. Or you're the Ravens that you're like, man, we're trying to compete year in and year out. What does that look like? Well, we can't get lazy as a coaching staff. We can't just say, man, we just need better players. No, you got to help those players be better players. You can't be lazy as a general manager. All right, like, what do you need? A Kyle Van Noy. What did he do last year? We need him because now we're going to have a new defense coordinator. We're going to have some guys that are going to be expected to be young players to step up. Man, a word of wisdom from him can go a long way. Okay, what else do we need? We got a franchise quarterback. We need to look at our salary cap. Well, we're going to go out there and get Derrick Henry because we need an outside-the-box coordinator. We got an outside-the-box coordinator. Now we got a Derrick Henry. But we also got some young studs in the likes of a Keaton Mitchell, the likes of Justice Hill. People don't really, talk much about, but that's okay. So let's look at the offensive line. Let's look at no stone unturned. Let's look at how our offensive line, the young players, can blossom into what they need to blossom into. And that is what makes you competitive year in and year out. There's a reason why you look at Mike Tomlin over there on the other side, and he hasn't had, a losing season, and he's always in the conversation, regardless. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at like, all right, this is the Ravens. This is who we are. Yes, I understand our fan base. Yes, I get it. We love, oh, wow, big shiny toy. What can we do when it comes to, getting that guy to come in? Hold on, pump the brakes. We'll get what we get, and we'll do it the way we do it as Ravens. And that's how they do it.
Yeah, and literally with Kyle Van Noy last year, it was 3 weeks into the season when they bring him in. So it's about opportunity. It's also about timing. And with the Ravens, you hit the nail on the head there, Q. Baltimore has rarely been an organization to go out there and spend $100 million on the first day of free agency. They like to scout out the free agent pool and figure out where guys fit. Plus, obviously, compensatory picks are a big part of what the Ravens do. And once that compensatory pick deadline has passed, I think we're going to see a lot more moves coming down the pipeline. But speaking of Kyle Van Noy, Q, we didn't have a chance to talk about the signing, you and I, last week because it happened the day after we recorded. So I want to get your opinion on it. We talked about Jadeveon Clowney and him leaving, and we talked about some of the other options out there on the market with Kyle Van Noy being the best one by a pretty wide margin. The Ravens get him at 2 years, $4.5 million per season, 2 years, $9 million total. I think a good value deal. The leadership he brought last year, obviously the play on the field. I think all the way around, it was a pretty big home run signing for Eric DeCosta and company.
Yeah, obviously, Jadeveon Clowney going down to Carolina, wish him well. It's one of those deals where leverage is king. And obviously, Carolina, they are trying to figure out their leverage, and they obviously got their guy, and so therefore puts the pressure right back on Eric DeCosta. I'm sure Kyle Van Noy's agent was like, yes, fellas, listen, let's not mess around. Let's just go ahead and get this thing done. And I think it was a smart move. I think it was good for Kyle. It was good for the Ravens. They got it done early. I'm sure Kyle's going to have many a vet day when it comes to training camp. We're not going to be seeing much of it, but that's okay. He's already proven he doesn't need to be out there. Now, at the same time, I think the locker room presence and some of the things that he brings to the table within the structure of what the Ravens like to do is going to be very important. I think that's something that Eric definitely even mentioned in the press conference, the Liars Luncheon. Like, hey, Kyle is one of those guys that we desperately need as far as filling out our roster and with quality men who can help develop us. What did he and John say that I think it was John when he was talking about it's not about the parts, it's about the sum total of the parts. And that sum total of the parts, I've heard that going way back to my high school days, but it rings true every single year. Like, there are going to be guys that are going to have certain roles. And, Deonte Harty, it could be one of those situations where he has a critical conversion, and next thing you know, it's a 20-yard punt return. Well, then now you got, you see another guy on special teams made a critical block, but then you see, Voorhees make an excellent, block that springs Derrick Henry, and now the game is, won, but now you got to seal the game. So now you got to, a Kyle Van Noy or a Matabike or, Jones, they all converge in on the, quarterback at the right time. And now all of a sudden you seal the game into discussion. Now you advancing to the next round and you raise your stock level up as far as your playoff prediction. We just don't know. But we know that when guys work together, guys understand their roles, guys enjoy coming to work, being professionals, mother of pearl, you got yourself a football team that's going to be competitive and in the thick of it.
Yep, and we see Baltimore there practically every single season based off of all those things you just mentioned there. And Baltimore now, Q, actually only has all those free agents we talked about that they had. Only 4 guys are left. 4 Ravens free agents remain out of the 20-plus they had. It's J.K. Dobbins, it's Dalvin Cook, it's Rock Ya-Sin, and it's Daryl Worley. So I wouldn't be shocked if we are past the re-signing point. Maybe a Daryl Worley could come back, but I don't know. I'm not really seeing a JK or Dalvin, or definitely not a Rock Ya-Sin come back at this point.
Yeah, no. Rock, we appreciated it. It was fun. I liked his personality. I think he was a tremendous guy, but it's weird. It seems like I was at the one training camp where Odell Beckham literally, looked up, Rock looked back, and then he accelerated up and caught the ball, and it was so just vet savvy awesomeness. And I remember Rock was like, whoa, I remember they mic'd him up and you heard him talking to Marlon about it. And then that was it. Like, whatever happened to Rock? Like, it just seemed like from that point forward, there was no Rock Ya-Sin, and so be it. But I'm glad, that he will either have an opportunity to go somewhere else, or maybe, who knows, one of the things that, Eric DeCosta says you can't have enough corners. And, I'm sure if it's a veteran minimum type of deal, then maybe he'll be back. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. I think, again, we talk about all the veteran signings Eric DeCosta had, how good he was at doing that last offseason. It was really the one miss was Rock Ya-Sin, and Ya-Sin's contract was the biggest one out of all those guys, up to $6 million for him. So, again, DeCosta had a great offseason, but, not everybody can be perfect. In fact, nobody can be perfect. So the one miss was Rock Ya-Sin. But speaking of DeCosta, the quote-unquote Liars Luncheon, the pre-draft press conference queue was a couple days ago, and there was a lot. Eric DeCosta had a lot to say. John Harbaugh obviously chimed in as well. There were a lot of questions, and Eric DeCosta talked about how the team, they'd like to draft a corner, they'd like to draft a running back at some point, but there were a lot of offensive line questions, a lot of offensive line answers, and to me, that was kind of the biggest takeaway, because we know how big of a need offensive line is for this team, especially with them losing 3 starters. And as we talked about earlier, they're going to give their guys on the roster a chance, but you have to look at the line class right now and how deep it is. To me, it feels like they're setting up to take multiple offensive linemen this year. But what did you take away generally from what DeCosta and Harbaugh had to say?
So I think, again, just from the bigger picture of the roster building, they feel good about their evaluations and they're in lockstep. So that's one. Obviously, when did Eric joke, about him and John down in the owners league meeting, and they were at the pool because they weren't as stressed to all high heaven because of the Lamar Jackson contract. So that's a good thing. I think at the same time, when you look at it, offensive line seems like that's priority number one. Filling out the offensive line room. I think, John was kind of interesting how he mentioned it doesn't matter what you did 5 years ago, is what you got to do now. So I don't know. I'm like, wow, that's kind of Ronnie Stanley-esque, shot across the bow, So, yeah, there's going to be I think, as we looked at the receiver room last year and all that, I think this offensive line room during minicamp and all that, it's going to really be telling how it will all unfold. And so I think bigger picture wise, when you see, them talk about it, I love that yes, Liars Luncheon, but the gamesmanship on where you kind of got to sift through it to really get to the nuts and bolts of it. And I think offensive line from both of their ears seem like it's something that's on the forefront of their their thought process.
Yeah, 9 picks for the Ravens. So we're going to see if they add to that. The draft picks we know in the post-Lamar Jackson contract era, very, very important. Those and the veteran signing. So we're going to see. But that the Liars Luncheon, I think the fan base has kind of chilled out a little bit on it over the years, where I think everybody kind of took what was said there as gospel, when in reality, obviously, Art DeCosta is not going to tip his entire draft board. In fact, it's not even completed yet, he said. They're still kind of going through that process. So it's going to be interesting. Draft again 2 weeks away. We're going to see how Baltimore ends up maneuvering up and down that draft board. First pick, number 30 for Baltimore. Q, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for hopping on. Tell people where they can find you, what's going on for you, as again, we're creeping up on that draft.
Missiletraining.com, missiletraining.com, missiletraining.com. Anywho, that's where you can find me from a sports performance, human movement aspect of things. Love to work with you. It doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter if you're 6 years old with a lot of focus and a lot of talent and potential, or you're 84 and you're looking for some health span longevity, or if you're my co-host and your last name is Ostriker, then basically you're going to be like, oh yeah, I need to go ahead and take it to the next level with my fitness. I'm going to help you out. Locked on Ravens is where you can find me. WJZ is where you can find me. And of course, on Twitter/X, you can find me on there and most social media. You can DM me on most of the platforms.
You'll find Q's work in the description below also, so be sure to check out his links and go to him for all of your fitness needs and fitness questions. The best in the business right there in Qadry Ismail. Q, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for hopping on with me, and thank you for tuning in to Locked On Ravens. Again, be sure to subscribe to this channel, both in video form and in audio form, 4 or 5 days a week, plus more of Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be rounding out the week with more Ravens content. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.